There is a persistent image in popular history of medieval outlaws as reckless wanderers living by ambush and impulse, slipping through the trees by instinct and bravado alone. That image overlooks a quieter and far more demanding reality. Survival beyond the authority of lord or crown in winter forests required discipline, planning, and knowledge that often rivaled formal military logistics. Many who attempted it did not endure long enough to leave records behind. Those who did left traces that reveal a system of environmental adaptation, supply management, and social negotiation rarely associated with banditry. Medieval outlaws did not simply hide in forests, they learned to inhabit them in ways that blurred the boundary between fugitive and resident. Their success or failure offers insight into how irregular groups survived harsh conditions without structured supply lines, and why later military doctrine came to study similar challenges in frontier warfare and guerrilla campaigning. Understanding this overlooked dimension reshapes how survival, authority, and terrain were intertwined in the medieval world. Their disappearance into forests reflected geography and governance as much as personal choice. Forests in medieval Europe were not empty wilderness but legally defined spaces shaped by custom and royal privilege. Vast tracts were designated as hunting reserves, governed by forest law that restricted settlement and exploitation. These restrictions produced landscapes simultaneously monitored and underpopulated, ideal for those seeking distance from manorial courts or feudal obligations. Outlaws gravitated toward regions where jurisdiction was fragmented or enforcement thin, including border forests and upland woodland zones. Winter intensified this dynamic. Patrols were fewer, travel was slower, and visibility diminished. Yet the same conditions that reduced oversight also raised the stakes for survival. Outlaws who persisted there relied on intimate knowledge of terrain. This knowledge was rarely acquired suddenly. Many had backgrounds as foresters, hunters, charcoal burners, or displaced peasants already familiar with seasonal cycles. Their ability to vanish stemmed from understanding routes invisible to mounted patrols, recognizing safe ground beneath snow cover, and predicting how frozen waterways altered movement. These practices paralleled the skills expected of scouts and light infantry, demonstrating why later military formations valued local guides during winter campaigns. The lesson carried forward: terrain familiarity often outweighed numerical strength when logistics faltered. Cold season survival depended on preparation, carried out months before the snow fell. Winter endurance did not begin with snowfall. It began in autumn, with gathering, preserving, and concealing resources. Medieval outlaw groups that survived the cold months treated time itself as a supply chain. Food stores were dried, smoked, or salted when possible. Nuts, roots, and preserved meat were hidden in caches, distributed across known routes. Such dispersal protected against discovery and ensured access, even if mobility was compromised. Shelter construction followed similar foresight. Temporary lean-tos were insufficient against sustained cold. Evidence suggests the use of semi-subterranean huts, insulated with turf and brush, that retained heat and reduced smoke visibility. Fire management became a matter of stealth and efficiency rather than comfort. Small shielded fires produced less detectable smoke and conserved fuel. This attention to concealment mirrors concerns later observed among irregular fighters avoiding aerial reconnaissance centuries afterward. The continuity is not coincidental. Harsh conditions force convergence towards similar adaptive solutions regardless of era. Failures of preparation often led to exposure or surrender. Records from judicial proceedings occasionally note individuals abandoning forest refuge during severe winters, accepting punishment rather than risking starvation. These cases remind us that survival was not romantic persistence, but calculated endurance measured against limited reserves. Relationships with nearby communities were as essential as any wilderness skill. The notion of complete isolation obscures the social dimension of outlaw survival. Honestly, few individuals could sustain themselves solely through foraging or hunting in winter scarcity. Interaction with nearby settlements was therefore common, though rarely visible in formal chronicles. Assistance ranged from coerced provision to voluntary support, shaped by kinship or shared grievance against authorities. These exchanges were delicate. Villagers risked penalties for aiding fugitives, yet cooperation persisted when it aligned with local interests. Outlaws might offer protection, redistribute stolen goods, or simply rely on familial bonds. This relationship formed an informal support network comparable to auxiliary civilian roles seen in later resistance movements. It demonstrated that survival beyond state systems often depended less on isolation than on alternative social structures. Authorities understood this and responded by targeting communities suspected of collaboration, tightening surveillance, or imposing collective responsibility. Such measures foreshadowed counterinsurgency strategies emphasizing population control. Medieval governance lacked modern terminology, but its actions reveal recognition of the same principle. Denying logistical support undermines irregular survival. Movement in winter forest required restraint rather than speed or boldness. Mobility under snow and ice imposed discipline that honestly contradicted romantic notions of daring raids. Tracks could betray location for days. Frozen branches amplified sound. Limited daylight compressed travel windows. Outlaw groups often minimized movement altogether, relying on previously established stores and shelters. When travel was necessary, it favored concealment over distance. Routes followed tree cover or frozen ground that masked footprints. Crossing open terrain invited detection. Timing mattered equally. Movement during snowfall or wind reduced traceability, though it increased navigational risk. Such cautious mobility demonstrates a sophisticated balance between urgency and patience, echoing doctrines later formalized in winter warfare manuals, emphasizing stealth and environmental synchronization. Capture narratives occasionally reference mistakes in this balance, unnecessary travel revealing positions, or overconfidence in covering tracks leading to pursuit. These outcomes reinforced lessons applicable far beyond the medieval forest. In any era, winter mobility punishes haste and rewards restraint, guided by environmental awareness. Hunting and gathering practices revealed both ingenuity and ecological limits. Sustenance drawn from winter landscapes was constrained by scarcity. Game was leaner and less predictable. Plant resources were minimal. Survival strategies therefore blended opportunistic hunting with careful rationing. Trapping proved more reliable than pursuit, conserving energy while increasing yield. Knowledge of animal behavior during winter migration or sheltering patterns enhanced success, yet ecological limits imposed boundaries that skill alone could not overcome. Overhunting near refuge sites depleted resources quickly. Groups were compelled to shift location or depend more heavily on stored provisions or external aid. This interplay between environment and consumption foreshadows later military recognition of carrying capacity, the understanding that terrain can support only limited sustained presence. Medieval outlaws learned this through consequence rather than theory. Their practices also illustrate adaptation without systematic ecological understanding. Resource use was pragmatic, guided by experience rather than conservation principle. Nonetheless, the necessity of maintaining viable hunting grounds encouraged dispersal and restraint, behaviors mirrored centuries later, in fieldcraft emphasizing sustainability within operational areas. Their experiences influenced how authorities and armies approached irregular survival challenges. Encounters between authorities and forest-based outlaws informed evolving approaches to territorial control. Patrol methods, seasonal enforcement adjustments, and the strategic use of local informants reflected institutional learning. While not codified as doctrine in modern terms, these adaptations reveal early recognition of asymmetric challenges posed by decentralized actors. Later, military thinkers confronting similar problems, whether in frontier zones or insurgent contexts, grappled with lessons that echoed medieval precedent. Knowledge of terrain, community networks, and seasonal constraints repeatedly determined outcomes more than direct confrontation. The endurance of such patterns underscores the relevance of examining outlaw survival not merely as anecdote, but as early evidence of logistical realities governing irregular conflict. Understanding this continuity enriches broader study of warfare and preparedness. It demonstrates that challenges associated with sustaining forces outside formal supply structures have deep historical roots. The medieval forest provided one of the earliest arenas where these dynamics played out in sustained form. Remembering their winter survival clarifies the realities behind disappearance and endurance. Outlaws who vanished into treacherous forests did not rely on mythic resilience. Their endurance reflected preparation, environmental literacy, and social entanglement within surrounding communities. Winter exposed weaknesses in each of these areas while rewarding foresight and discipline. Examining their experiences expands understanding of how marginal groups navigated systems designed to exclude them, and how authorities adapted in response. These stories matter because they illuminate persistent truths about survival and conflict. Terrain shapes strategy. Logistics determines longevity. Communities influence outcomes as much as individual skill. The medieval context differs from modern warfare, yet the underlying dynamics remain recognizable. By studying overlooked experiences such as these, Historical understanding moves beyond spectacle toward the mechanisms that truly governed endurance. If this kind of grounded historical analysis adds value to your understanding, consider subscribing to Iron Age Instincts and sharing this video with others who appreciate deeper context over surface narratives.